compulsion and the creation of a working class. The brutal process of separating people from their means of providing for themselves, known as primitive accumulation, caused enormous hardships for the common people. This same primitive accumulation provided a basis for capitalist development. The enclosing of the commons was the most well-known technique of primitive accumulation. Wealthy members of the gentry would claim as private property land that groups of people had previously shared. Joan Thirsk, one of the most knowledgeable historians of early British agriculture, described the nature of some of the social and personal transformations associated with the enclosures in the long citation at the top of this chapter. Some people denounced this expropriation. Marx echoed the sentiment, charging, the expropriation of the direct producers was accomplished by means of the most merciless barbarianism, and under the stimulus of the most infamous, the most sordid, the most petty and the most odious of passions. Marx 1977, pages 928. Still, this dispossession was legal in a sense. After all, the peasants did not have property rights in the narrow sense. They only had traditional rights. As markets evolved, first land-hungry gentry and later the bourgeoisie used the state to create a legal structure to abrogate these traditional rights. Tygar 1977. Simple dispossession from the commons was a necessary, but not always sufficient condition to harness the common people to the labor market. Even after the enclosures, laborers retained privileges in the shrubs, woods, undergrowth, stone quarries and gravel pits, thereby obtaining fuel for cooking and wood for animal life, crab apples and cob nuts from the hedgerows, brambles, tansy and other wild herbs from any other little patch of waste. Almost every living thing in the parish, however insignificant, could be turned to some good use by the frugal peasant laborer or his wife. Everett 1967, pages 405. To the extent that the traditional economy might be able to remain intact despite the loss of the commons, a supply of labor satisfactory to capital might not be forthcoming and the level of real wages would be higher, thereby impeding the process of accumulation. Not surprisingly, one by one, these traditional rights also disappeared. In the eyes of the bourgeoisie, property became absolute property. All the tolerated rights that the peasantry had acquired or preserved were now rejected. Foucault 1979, pages 85. Primitive accumulation consisted of two parts that we might compare to the two blades of a scissors. The first blade served to undermine the ability of people to provide for themselves. The other blade was a system of stern measures required to keep people from finding alternative survival strategies outside of the system of waged labor. A host of oftentimes harsh measures designed to undermine whatever resistance people maintained against the demands of wage labor accompanied the dispossession of the peasants' rights, even before capitalism had become a significant economic force. For example, beginning with the Tudors, England enacted a series of stern measures designed to prevent peasants from drifting into vagrancy or falling back on welfare systems. According to a statute of 1572, beggars over the age of 14 were to be severely flogged and branded with a red-hot iron on the left ear unless someone was willing to take them into service for 2 years. Repeat offenders over 18 were to be executed unless someone would take them into service. Third offenses automatically resulted in execution. Marx 1977, pages 896 ff. 1974, pages 736. Mantoux 1961, pages 432. Similar statutes appeared almost simultaneously during the early 16th century in England, the Low Countries, and Zurich. Leroy Lattery 1974, pages 137. Eventually, the majority of workers, lacking any alternative, had little choice but to work for wages at something close to the subsistence level. In the wake of primitive accumulation, the wage relationship became a seemingly voluntary affair. Workers needed employment and employers wanted workers. In reality, the underlying process was far from voluntary. In Foucault's words, historically, the process by which the bourgeoisie became the politically dominant class in the course of the 18th century was masked by the establishment of an explicitly coded and formally egalitarian juridical framework, made possible by the organization of a parliamentary, representative regime. But the development and generalization of disciplinary mechanisms constituted the other, dark side of these processes. Supported by these tiny, everyday, physical mechanisms, by all those systems of micropower that are essentially non-egalitarian. Foucault 1979, pages 222. Indeed, the history of the recruitment of labor is an uninterrupted story of coercion either through the brute force of poverty or through more direct regulation, which made the continuation of the old ways impossible. More 1951. A purported need for discipline justified the harsh measures that the poor endured. Indeed, writers of every persuasion shared an obsessional concern with the creation of a disciplined labor force. Furness 1965. Appleby 1978. Supporters of such measures typically defended their position in terms of need to civilize the workers or to stamp out sloth and indolence. Capital required these harsh measures to conquer the household economy in order to be able to extract a greater mass of surplus value. In fact, almost everyone close to the process of primitive accumulation, friend or foe of labor, agreed with Charles Hall's verdict, that, if they were not poor they would not submit to employment. Hall 1805, pages 144. At least so long as their remuneration were held low enough to create substantial profits. Employers were quick to perceive the relationship between poverty and the chance to earn handsome profits. Ambrose Crowley, for example, set up his works in the North rather than in the Midlands, for there the country is very poor and populous, so workmen must of necessity increase. Cited in Pollard 1965, pages 197. This process was cumulative. An increase in poverty begat more population, which, in turn, stimulated further population. In this regard, Marx noted that the level of wages in agricultural districts of England varied according to the particular conditions under which the peasantry had emerged from serfdom. Marx 1865, pages 72. The more impoverished the serfs, the lower their descendants' wages would be. Classical political economy. In the war on sloth, the classical political economists joined in the chorus of those condemning sloth and indolence on the part of the poor. Although they applauded the leisure activities of the rich, they denounced all behavior on the part of the less fortunate that did not yield the maximum work effort as sloth. Consider the case of Francis Hutcheson. The never-to-be-forgotten Dr. Hutcheson as his student, Adam Smith, later described him. Letter from Smith to Dr. Archibald Davidson, November 16, 1787. Reprinted in Mosner and Ross 1977, pages 309, the same Francis Hutcheson, whose A Short Introduction to Moral Philosophy in 3 books 1742, seems to have served as a model for the economic sections of Smith's Glasgow Lectures. C. Scott 1965, pages 235, 240. A later work, his System of Moral Philosophy, exemplifies Dr. Hutcheson's contributions to that noble field of moral philosophy. After a few brief notes on the need to raise prices, Hutcheson mused, if a people have not acquired an habit of industry, the cheapness of all the necessaries of life encourages sloth. The best remedy is to raise the demand for all necessaries. Sloth should be punished by temporary servitude at least. Hutchison 1755. 2. Pages 318 to 19. Emphasis added. These three sentences were all contained in the same paragraph. The menacing, at least in this citation, suggests that the never-to-be-forgotten professor might have had even sterner medicine in mind than mere temporary servitude. What else might the good doctor recommend to earnest students of moral philosophy in the event that temporary servitude would prove inadequate in shunting people off to the workplace?